Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Friday SCORE webinar series. Sorry, I've just had a moment where I couldn't figure out how to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Hope everybody is doing well. If you're based in New Jersey, I hope you're not struggling too much with this swampy weather that we have. Today we have the pleasure of having Ryan Jenkins with us, and he's going to be speaking about the future generation workforce. And I have lost my notes, which is why I'm hesitating. Just give me a second, everybody. Ryan is going to be talking to us today about the future of the workforce and the generation that we have coming up. And he is, I don't know why I've lost my notes. Here they go. So he is a two-time published author and an Inc. magazine columnist. He spent 8 years as a speaker and a trainer, helping organizations work and lead and communicate across generations. He has had top ranked insights featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and the Wall Street Journal. And he's also the co-founder of SyncLX, a learning and development company that's redefining how to learn in a digital world. When he's not speaking and writing, you can find him sampling craft beers from around the world with his wife, leading the circus that is their 3 children and yellow Labrador in their home in Atlanta, Georgia. So I would like you to join me in welcoming speaker, author, and the way below average golfer, Ryan Jenkins. And Ryan, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Ryan Jenkins, and thank you so much for your time and attention. Let's get started. And I'd like to start here with you imagining your first Uber ride. Now, if you've never used Uber or Lyft or any other ride sharing service, I want you to at least imagine yourself in this scenario. So you downloaded Uber, you put in your address, you summon your first vehicle, and in real time, you can see the vehicle coming to pick you up. In the back of your mind, you're thinking this is a pretty seamless experience. You get in the vehicle, you start heading towards your destination, and as you're approaching the destination, that's when things got weird for you. Because in the back of your mind, you're thinking this: what happens next? Do I need to take out a credit card and swipe my credit card to pay the driver? Do I need to open up the app and execute something? Do I need to pay with a cash tip? And as you come to find out, none of these things actually need to happen. You simply just exit the vehicle and the car drives off. That's it. It's an effortless and seamless experience. Now, many of us aren't having that experience as often today as we have been in the past due to all of the unusual circumstances surrounding all of us around the world. But nonetheless, that effortless and seamless experience that was happening 1 million times a day around the world in the pre-COVID world, that effortless and seamless experience was becoming an expectation that was rippling into our lives, specifically our personal lives. But now, because that's more and more the norm, it's now rippling into our work lives as well. However, for the emerging generations, that effortless and seamless experience is becoming an expectation that's rippling exponentially faster. Thus, it's creating a new breed of customers, a new breed of employees, a new breed of future leaders. So today we're going to unpack who is this next generation, and I'm going to give you some specific strategies on how to navigate. So here's today's big idea. It's simply the next generation provides data points into what's next. The better understanding you and I have of the emerging generations, the better equipped we are to understand where our business needs to go in the future, how we need to pivot our leadership, how we need to pivot our recruiting, pivot our strategies, et cetera. So the better understanding we have of each generation, the better equipped we are to thrive in the future. So that's the undercurrent of today's conversation. So here's a snapshot of the agenda. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the next generation. Who are they and some of these external factors that are shaping their behaviors. Then once we have a good understanding of the next generation, I'm going to give you specific strategies on how to attract, engage, and retain the next generation. And then we should have plenty of time for some questions. So be thinking about your questions and we'll take those at the end. And don't forget, you can email me. There's my email on the screen. It's ryan@ryan-jenkins.com. If you have an email An hour from now, 1 year from now, send me an email. I'm happy to help. I want to add as much value as I can outside of the 60 minutes that I have with you. So just know, take note of my email if you want to take advantage. All right, we're going to do some live polling today. So take out your mobile device. That would be my preference. But you can also open up a new browser on your desktop as well and go to this link. So open up a browser, visit this link. And I'm going to do that as well because I'm going to be chiming in with the polls as well. And once you arrive at that link, when I prompt the polling slides throughout our time together, you will simply see the question and then the potential responses on your device or in the browser on your desktop, and simply tap or click whatever response you think is correct, and we'll see your results live. If you're watching this in the future, hello from the past. I hope things are a little bit brighter where you are, but nonetheless, you won't be able to interact live, of course, as you're watching this pre-recorded, but you'll be able to see some of the live participants' responses, and the data should be helpful as well. All right, so here we go. Here's our first poll, which is simply, what is your generation? And usually if I can advance the slide quick enough where no one's responded, it's millennials or Gen Z that come flying in first, because I didn't have to tell them to take out their mobile device. They already had it out. They just toggled over, chimed in, and that was that. Well, this is fantastic. It looks like we've got 5 different generations represented live. That's awesome. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just what generation you're a part of. And it's helpful for all of us to kind of see the different representation of the folks on here. And then I also want to get you warmed up to the technology, because we'll be using this a few more times throughout our time together. It looks like bulk of the folks are Gen X and Boomers, followed by Millennials. Then we've got some Builders and Gen Zers. So that's great. So keep those devices out, keep that browser open. We'll be interacting more via the poll shortly. Here's a snapshot of the generations. Middle column is done by age as of 2020. On the right side, that's the peak US population. You notice there's a couple asterisks on the bottom right that represents that those generations aren't that large anymore, unfortunately due to folks passing away, but it still gives you a sense of how the generations have stacked up. Now, anytime you and I are talking about generations today and moving forward into the future, it is absolutely critical that we note this. Generations are clues, they're not absolutes. Generations are clues, they're not absolutes. But in my opinion, and I think you're going to agree with me after our time together, they're very big clues in how you lead, communicate, recruit, sell, fill in the blank. The better understanding we have of each generation, the better equipped we are to do all those things in the very multi-generational marketplace you and I find ourselves operating in. But don't forget, they are clues, not absolutes. So the demographic we're going to be talking about today is the 18 to 25 year old range. Now those folks are cuspers. Cuspers are people that are on the cusp of 2 generations. So 18 to 25 year olds are on the cusp of Millennial and Generation Z generation. So for the purpose of our conversation today, I'm going to be using the term merging or next generation to refer to this demographic. Rather than, lumping in Millennials and Gen Z, we're just going to really kind of dial it into merging or next generation, but just know that we're talking about that age range. So let me give you a couple data points on the generations and how they show up in the workplace as far as the percentage wise. Here's the numbers as of 2020. Millennials are the dominant generation in the workforce. And as of 2016, that was the first year they became the dominant generation in the workforce. And now we see Generation Z now inching into the workforce, mostly in the form of internships. But they are going to be coming into the workforce at a pace we've never seen before for reasons we're going to discuss in just a little bit. But by 2025, this is the makeup of the global workforce. 3 out of 4 workers around the globe will be of the emerging generations. So let's pause as you're absorbing some of this information. I want you to think about the way that you did work, the way that you operated your business just 5 years ago. Just 5 years ago. I bet a lot has changed in that time, right? I bet the processes, the policies you have, your types of communication, the pace of work, I bet a lot's changed in those 5 years in the way that you work. So if we now fast forward to 2025, and especially coming out of this pandemic, the world's going to be a much different place, especially now as we have more digital natives that are stepping into leadership roles, that are merging into the marketplace. So the 2025 marketplace and workplace is going to look much different. And I believe that when we stand in 2025 and look back in 2020, we're going to not recognize kind of some of the old ways that we were functioning in. So again, what I love this conversation about generations is, again, this next generation provides data points into what's next. So if we have a good understanding of some of their behaviors, they give us insights on how we can position our businesses in 2025. Let's do another poll. What do you think goes in the blank here? 52% of workers say they're least likely to get along with someone from another blank. Now, you shouldn't have to hit the back button. You shouldn't even have to hit refresh. You should see this poll showing up on in your browser or on your device. And for those that may just be joining us live, if you visit the link that you see at the top of the screen there, the top of the slide, you'll be able to interact with us live. You'll be able to see your results, and there's no sign in required. You just jump in. Of course, your planet is the tongue-in-cheek response. But recent research shows that over 50% of millennials would consider vacationing in outer space. Now, that was a pre-COVID research. That could be a lot higher now. Almost like, let's get out of here. But that's really fascinating. It's very generational as far as which generation is kind of has their sights beyond the planet. So that response planet might be a little bit more relevant a lot sooner than any of us anticipate. All right, get your finals answers in. And the correct answer is not up there. It's the only time I'm going to do this to this fine bunch of individuals. The correct answer is not there. And the reason why it's not there is because I wanted to make a very poignant point in that the correct answer is generations. I'm sure a lot of you saw that train coming. But generations actually trumps all of the other diversity metrics that you see listed here as causing the most tension in the workplace. So yes, 52% of workers say they're least likely to get along with someone from another generation. And unfortunately, my friend, this is not slowing down. This trend is only intensifying. In fact, 62% of Gen Z anticipate challenges working with baby boomers and Gen X, yet only 5% anticipate challenges working with millennials. So it's very clear, the data is very clear that there is a gap between the established generations and the emerging generations. And if we're first not aware that that gap exists, and then we're not equipped with strategies to close that gap, you're just going to find yourself more and more disconnected from the folks that you're recruiting, that you're leading, that you're selling to. So again, this is why it's a relevant conversation. And our goal today is to close that gap. Let's look at a couple of data points about millennials and Gen Z so we can all get on the same page and have a little bit more insight into who the emerging generations are. The millennials, 11.3 trillion is the projected financial assets of US millennials by 2030. And this is one of many reasons why all of us can't seem to go a day without hearing the term millennial, because millennials are stepping into their prime working and prime spending years. Thus, they have a growing bank account that every industry on the planet is interested in getting a piece of, which is why they've been so highly talked about and scrutinized. 71% of millennials are disengaged at work, which is the most of any generation. Now, most people in general, humans in general, are highly disengaged at work. The recent numbers are over 60%. So most of us are disengaged. It just so happens that millennials are just a little bit more disengaged than other generations. Now let's look at Gen Z. 63% of Generation Z doesn't remember a time before the Great Recession. So that's very interesting, right? So that gives you a sense of the social mood, the tough financial conversations that were happening inside the home as Generation Z came of age. So they can't remember a time before the Great Recession. And what's really interesting about today's pandemic is that this pandemic is the end point to Generation Z. We now have an end point to Generation Z. So the generation that comes after Generation Z, that's younger than Generation Z, they will not have they won't be able to remember the event of COVID-19, and or they will not have been born yet to experience COVID-19. So truly, this pandemic for the youngest generation, which right now is being termed Generation Alpha, will have no emotional response or connection to the pandemic. It will truly be history to them. So that's why these massive events like the Great Recession, the pandemic, are very significant generational events. And it's fascinating if you study generations like myself to kind of weigh into this and try to figure out how is this going to impact each generation. The last data point on Gen Z to consider is 70% of Gen Z might reject traditional business to work independently. So what's really interesting about that data point is it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur, right? You can have an idea and you can literally just start an Instagram account, and with a couple $100, you can market to hundreds of thousands of people. And it's just never been easier to be an entrepreneur. It's also never been sexier to be an entrepreneur. And of course, in light of everything going on, we anticipate Generation Z to start having full-time work, but also more side hustles to really embrace the gig economy. So why is this important to you if you're trying to attract Generation Z talent? It's important because not only are you competing with your competitors in your area to attract next generation talent, but you're actually competing with this next generation's ability, desire, and resources to be an entrepreneur. So that's never really been an option. That's never really been an outlet that this generation could consider. And that plays into how we effectively engage and recruit this next generation workforce. Let's look at a couple data points on how the pandemic is impacting this next generation. 60% of current Gen Z college students say the pandemic has changed their college plans. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a little bit. 45% of Gen Z's work hours have decreased compared to 36% of Americans. So if you're looking at, there's a lot of the data is pointing to Gen Z being the generation that has been burdened the most from a work perspective amid this pandemic. And then lastly, 52% of Gen Z say they do not have the tools they need to successfully work remotely. So Gen Z is being heavily impacted by this pandemic in big ways. Of course, there's no one that hasn't lost something during all of this, but certainly for Gen Z, it's really going to be impactful on how they approach work and other things as well, as we're going to see here shortly. All right, so that gives you a high overview of the next generation and kind of some of the dynamics that are changing their behaviors. So with this knowledge, now let's launch into some strategies on how to attract, engage, and retain this next generation. And first, I think it'd be helpful for us to settle here and talk about the 8 ways that COVID is changing the future workforce. So we've identified that there's 8 of them. We're not going to go in depth into all of them. In fact, we're just going to really touch on 4 of them. But let me give you all 8 now. Deeper dependence on technology. That shouldn't surprise anybody. As we're engaged in more remote work, we've been having to lean into technology in ways that many of us didn't expect or perhaps never wanted to. Unconventional educational backgrounds. Gen Z is strongly considering foregoing a traditional college education to go work right away for a multitude of reasons that we'll talk about in just a bit, but just expect moving forward that there's going to be a lot more unconventional educational backgrounds, especially as higher education is upside down at the moment. We expect this next generation to enter their careers sooner for some of the same reasons as to why they're challenging higher education. They're going to have an enhanced value on learning and development. Gen Z is going to be the longest living generation in human history, and we anticipate they'll have a 100+ year career. And so if they're going to be able to sustain and have a fruitful career and provide for themselves and or their families, they know that they're going to have to constantly learn, unlearn, reskill, unlearn, reskill, unlearn, reskill. And so they're committed to being engaging in learning and development. So they have an enhanced value on that, and they're especially going to look to their employers to provide that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. There's going to be a revised view of employers. The employer-employee relationship is evolving very rapidly. It was evolving before COVID, and COVID's really just kind of hit the accelerator button on what that looks like. Uncommon career paths. We're going to see a lot of people that are going to have to switch gears and try different careers. So you're going to start to see more and more untraditional and uncommon career paths in the educational background, especially for the emerging generations. There's going to be a demand for high emotional intelligent leaders. And lastly, there's going to be greater global unity. Generation Z is the first global generation. They identify more with global peers than they do with any other generation before them. And this is a generation that's able to play Xbox with an earpiece in, connected live with someone halfway around the globe in real time and have conversation and be connected. So they have a different view of borders and they're much more unified as a global community. And of course, experiencing this global pandemic is only going to unify them as shared hardship unifies humans. So these are the four that we're going to really dig into for our remaining time together, are these four. So let's get started. This, I think, is a good launching off point. These are the three must-haves at work for the emerging generations. Number one, they want a better boss. Top talent view effective leaders as a must. Number two, they want bigger vision. Top talent want to connect work with impact. And lastly, they want a brighter future. Top talent have a proclivity to be future oriented. Now, you might be looking at these three things thinking to yourself, Ryan, doesn't every generation want these three things in a job? Right? You might be asking yourself that very question. And my response to that question is very simply, yes. I think if we boil it down, these are the three things that people want at work. Now, as small business owners, as entrepreneurs, it varies a little bit, but I think in general for people at work, these are the three things that they're interested in. So here's the big X factor. Here's where the generational gap comes in. For previous generations, these three things were nice to haves, but for the emerging generations, these three things are conditions of employment. Think back to the top of our conversation today about that, your first Uber ride. And remember when you got out, you just got out, you didn't have to do anything else. Because you had that experience, that effortless and seamless experience, that's becoming an expectation that's rippling into other aspects of your lives. And for Generation Z that has those effortless and seamless experiences at every corner of their life, they have different expectations in every aspect of their life, and their employers is certainly one of those areas as well. So I alluded to the employer-employee relationship evolving, and this is one of the reasons and one of the ways that that relationship is evolving. Let's do another poll. I'm curious, what do you think goes in the blank here? Over 60% of Gen Z say blank should take less than 15 minutes, with many of Gen Z saying less than 5 minutes. So again, if you're just now joining us, go ahead and visit that link at the top of the slide, and you can interact with this poll live. You'll be able to see your results on the screen. And again, you shouldn't have to hit the back button or anything else. So it looks like team meetings is the winner here, followed by job applications. Really, I think there's a case to be made for all of these responses, but the correct answer is job applications. Job applications. So yes, over 60% of Generation Z, the emerging generations, say a job application should take less than 15 minutes, with many saying less than 5 minutes. So let's spend our first category looking at talent attraction. And so if we're going to understand how to attract this next generation into our businesses, into our organizations, let's look at a couple of these data points to better understand how they approach it and then some of the platforms they're using. So the top things the next generation want to know about an organization is culture and values, perks and benefits, and employee perspectives. Those are the 3 things they're interested in knowing about before they pursue an opportunity at an organization. And the top platform the next generation uses to learn about an employer. I want you to think to yourself what the answer to that might be. What's the top platform the next generation uses to learn about an employer? Now, in the past, I used to do presentations to groups big and small all around the world on this topic. And when I would ask this question, I would get responses from the audience like Glassdoor or Indeed or LinkedIn or Facebook. And 9 times out of 10, the live audience would never actually say the correct answer, which in itself demonstrated this gap in this generational gap, is that just other generations didn't understand how this new generation was approaching job opportunities. So the correct answer is YouTube. YouTube is where they're going to actually learn about employers. And to give us a little bit more context and understand why that's happening, this following point will help. The top obstacle the next generation has for joining an organization is not knowing what the organization is like. So they're going to YouTube to understand, to see what it looks like to work there. They want to see the workspace. They want to see the different employees. They want to be able to understand the product or service that the employer is delivering. They want to have a clear vision of what it looks like to work there. And that's why they're going to YouTube. So the first strategy I'd like to share with you is to deliver a vivid video of the work and or organization, especially now as we're in more remote working environments. How can we use video to better connect not only with our employees, but with our job candidates, as well as customers and clients? So help the emerging generations visualize themselves at your organization. And a great way to do that is using video. So let me give you a good example of an organization that's done this well. SAP recently shared 40 compelling recruiting videos on YouTube of real employees sharing their perspectives of the company's culture, values, and perks. And SAP last year was on track to hire 7,000 Gen Zers. So they're all in on video because they know this generation is wanting video to understand what it looks like to work there. Now, what SAP also understood is this other emerging trend, which is that Generation Z is more likely than any other generation before them to choose a city before they choose a job. They will choose a city before they choose a job. Now, for some of you, your head just exploded. You're thinking, that's not the equation. The formula has always been get a job and then move to wherever that employer needs you. But my friends, the times have changed, haven't it? Before COVID, because we were in a mobile world, you didn't have to be in the same location as your ideal employer. And of course, during this pandemic, and certainly on the other side of this pandemic, there's going to be a big appetite to be able to have more autonomy, more flexibility with where people work. And so SAP understood this emerging trend. So not only were they showcasing the work and the workspace that they were hiring into, but they were actually showcasing the cities in which they were hiring into as well. So they were showcasing the bars and restaurants and green space and all of the amenities that the city has, because they knew that Gen Z was actually evaluating that just as much as they were the actual work itself. So all things to consider as we're attracting this next generation into our organizations. Let's do another poll. What do you think goes in the blank? 74% of Generation Z believe jobs should have blank. My favorite response, of course, is the last one. Someone else do it. All right, options for remote working. Well, since we just talked about that, that's a great response. Again, there's a case to be made for all of these, but the correct answer that I'm looking for here is greater meaning. So it looks like 25% of you got it, greater meaning. And again, that kind of aligns with the 3 must-haves at work that we discussed as well. So on the heels of this idea of greater meaning, let's move into our next category. Let's talk about how we engage the next generation. So I want you to think to yourself, what do these 4 things have in common? I'm going to give you 4 scenarios, and I want you to think to yourself what they all have in common. Number 1, scholarship fundraisers felt more motivated to secure donations when they had contact with scholarship recipients. Number 2, lifeguards were more vigilant after reading stories about people whose lives have been been saved by lifeguards. Number 3, cooks were more motivated and worked harder when they saw those who would be eating their food. And lastly, radiologists were more accurate reading x-rays when shown a picture of the patient. What do these 4 things have in common? Now, normally if I'm in a live audience, or if I'm doing a virtual session with a smaller group that's unmuted, we can start taking some of the responses, and typically people will say, you know, they're very connected with the client, or there's some kind of emotional attachment. You get a lot of really good responses, and I bet many of you have had similar responses, and some of you probably even made the very specific distinction of the 4 things that these items have in common. And what these 4 things have in common is this: workers are connected to the people benefiting from their labor. So when workers are connected to the people benefiting from their labor, as seen in all 4 of these examples, it improves performance. And as you can see, these 4 examples are extremely varied across all kinds of different disciplines and industries and types of work. So this is really a universal human truth. If we're connected with those benefiting from our labor, our performance improves. So that leads us to our second strategy, which is to identify the beneficiaries of the labor. Connecting workers to the beneficiaries of their work creates more engagement, motivation, and it allows employees to transcend their task list. Now, this is a strategy that will specifically work really well with the emerging generations, as we saw from our last poll, that over 70% of Gen Z want greater meaning at work. And how can you help them discover that greater meaning? It's helping them understand that what they do benefits something or someone, whether that's internal or external. So the better we can get at helping them identify those beneficiaries, the more engaged, motivated, and ultimately they can transcend their task list. So the next logical question when I share the strategy is, well, how do I do that? And here's how you do that. Here's how to identify the beneficiaries of the labor. You simply ask why repeatedly. So let me show you how it works. Let's say you want to help a group of folks that are cleaning hotel rooms to identify the beneficiaries of their labor. So you ask them, why do you clean hotel rooms? Likely the first response you'll get is, because that's what my boss tells me to do. That's the generic, very logical first response. So to go deeper, you got to ask why. And why does that matter? Then the next response might be because it keeps the rooms from getting dirty. And why does that matter? Because it makes rooms more sanitary and more pleasant. And why does that matter? Because it provides clean space for customers to relax and rejuvenate. Typically, it takes asking why 4 to 5 times before we can really start to get to the crux of or understand who is benefiting from our labor. And again, if we can have that, identify that individual or that group of people, the more engaged at work we're going to be. So ask why repeatedly to identify the beneficiaries of the labor. All right, I think this is our last poll. So if you haven't got one right, this is it. You know, this is your Hail Mary. I believe in you. What do you think goes in the blank? 65% of youth entering school today will work in jobs that do not blank. All right, the far majority of you nailed it. It is currently exist. I'm sure many of you have heard a version of this data because of how fast the world's moving. This generation is being educated for jobs that don't exist, which is just wild to think. But I don't think that would surprise anybody because of how fast things are moving, how innovative the world's getting, and how fast our lives are changing and our businesses are evolving. So let's talk about how do we retain the next generation. And I want to first address some of the next generation education challenges that are facing the emerging generations. So as we just saw, 65% of the youth entering school today will work in jobs that do not currently exist. So the question then that is blaring to this next generation is around this idea of, well, if I have a longer life, then I'm gonna have a longer career. And the question facing them is, well, what value does a college degree have in today's high flux times? Research tells us the first person to celebrate their 150th birthday has already been born. So because of advances in medicine, because of advances in technology, we are living longer. Humanity is living longer. And Gen Z is going to have the longest lives of any generation before them. And if that's true, then they're going to have a longer career. And if careers are evolving as quickly as this data is showing us, they're going to have to constantly re-up their skills and relearn and unlearn. And so if they're going to have a 100-year-long career, how long will a 4-year degree sustain them? Probably not very long, especially looking at that data point. So that's a real challenge facing Generation Z, and that's why they're pushing against the traditional idea and notion of higher education. Another interesting data point, 67% of Gen Z indicate their top concern is being able to afford college. That shouldn't surprise any of us because Gen Z has had a front row seat watching millennials start their careers with all of the debt they have, and thus they're starting their careers with their shoelaces tied. So Gen Z and the emerging generations, they want to avoid debt at all costs. And so they're asking themselves, how do I afford education? Are there educational alternatives I should consider in order to avoid debt? And because of how much digital technology is infiltrating all of our lives, there's more and more educational alternatives than ever before. And lastly, 75% of Gen Z say there are other ways of getting a good education than going to college. So we're seeing this shift from learn to work versus work to learn. In the past, that was always the framework, right? Go get an education or learn a trade and then go put that into practice for the rest of your career. And that worked for a lot of our past generations and our ancestors. But that's not working anymore. Right now, the shift is happening. Well, let me go work for an employer and I can learn as I work. It's this idea of just-in-time learning, on-demand learning. So the shift is starting to look to the employers. The burden is now becoming on the shoulders of employers to begin offering rich and robust learning development opportunities. So the question that the next generation's facing is, why can't I forgo higher ed and work for a company that offers university-like learning and development? And so a lot of the organizations that we work with are leaning into this in a big way, and they're trying to figure out how do we create more robust learning opportunities, not only to help our workforce reskill, but also to whet the appetite of this next generation. So what would a next generation education or institution look like? Well, these are some things that I think would be pretty compelling. It would be self-paced. It would be 100% remote and digital. It would be mobile first and responsive. So you could just pull it up on your mobile device and have it would be fully responsive to a mobile device. It would be competency-based and practical. It'd be 1/4 the time commitment, 1/8 the cost of average college tuition, and 100% tuition back guarantee. Some of you are looking at this, looks like that is a pipe dream, Ryan. Is it? Because it actually exists. It's a university called Top Rock University, and I actually have the pleasure of serving as the president of Top Rock University. If you want to learn more, you go to toprock.org. I say this, one, because I'm super proud of the work we've done with this, but two, it's a great example of how education's being shooken up, and there are better ways to deliver education. And so we're focused on rising up the next generation of entrepreneurs through Top Rock University, and might be something to consider if you're looking to, one, recruit talent, but also if you have a workforce that is interested in getting a degree that doesn't want to take on all of the additional costs. So let's keep talking more about this idea of education, and L&D, learning and development, is an absolute must. And let's give you some data points on how much of a must it is for the next generation. So the top aspects the next generation look for in a potential employer. Now, this research was was pre-COVID, but some of the tangibles here, or the insights and the takeaways, I think are still going to ring true. International experience, that's probably off the table now, right? For in the COVID times that we find ourselves. Pathways to promotion, professional development, travel for work. Again, that might be off the table, at least if we were to resurvey everybody. And lastly, gaining skills to enhance career. So 3 of the top 5 things this next generation is looking for in a potential employer have to do with learning and development. So if you are interested in not only attracting, but engaging and retaining talent today and in the future, I think one of the biggest levers you can pull is learning and development. So the final strategy I want to share with you, and then we're going to get to some questions, is to encourage and support continuous learning. So that ways to prompt learning could be have them run a meeting, attend an industry conference when it's safe, train a coworker, watch an informative video, lead a presentation. I think that there's so many opportunities for us to begin developing this next generation and giving over opportunities for them to engage that we overlook. And so hopefully these are some good reminders of where we can have our workforce engage and thus develop themselves in the process, but also be more loyal to their employer as well. So I want to give you one company example that's doing this really well. And let me share some data points, then I'll tell you who this company is. So be thinking about who you think this, and you're 99% sure you'll know the brand. They are the most beloved brand in their category. They make more per unit than any other competitors. And 70% of their frontline workers are Gen Zers. Thinking to yourself, do you know who, you have some good guesses on what brand I'm talking about? I live in Atlanta, Georgia. So one of our beloved companies that's based here in Atlanta, Georgia is Chick-fil-A. And I run a podcast where we interview Fortune 500 leaders and just really cutting edge thought leaders. We've got over 100 episodes. You can check it out wherever you listen to podcasts. It's called the Next Generation Catalyst Podcast. And we recently interviewed David Salyers, who's the former chief marketing officer at Chick-fil-A. He was at Chick-fil-A for 30 years. And in those 30 years at Chick-fil-A, he used to travel around and talk to different franchisors, the small business owners that would own 1 or 2 Chick-fil-A restaurants. And he loved to ask this question when he would visit those franchisors. He would ask them, what business are you in? It's kind of back to like the identifying the beneficiaries of the labor, right? And asking why to get to the crux of it. But he'd ask them, what business are you in? And never once did he have a franchisor say that they're in the fast food business. Never once. In his 30 plus years at Chick-fil-A, never had a franchisor say we're in the Chick-fil-A or the fast food business. But a common response, and his favorite response that he got, was this: we are a leadership development academy masquerading as a fast food restaurant. How powerful is that? That changes the dynamic, right? No longer are you a fast food restaurant and just hoping to to pull in talent off the street to get them in the restaurant to crank out some chicken sandwiches. No, that you take a whole new approach, and the type of quality individuals you're bringing in your organization, how long they're going to stick around, changes drastically when you frame it in that way. So it's the development focused organizations that engage the emerging generations. Like I said, if you want to attract more, engage better, and retain more talent, focus on development. And this last statistic probably really underpins all of what we've been talking about in this last section. 61% of the emerging generations feel more successful, confident, and less burned out after they've spent time learning. If we can offer up more learning opportunities, we're not only going to give more hope to this next generation, but they're going to be less burned out, more confident, and they're going to keep showing up to work. All right, so on the stems of, or on the idea of learning and development, I want to give you a really easy way that you might be able to deliver more learning and development in a more structured way. And this is completely free to all of our small business owners that are out there today. If you text bonus to that number, so you just text bonus to that number, we'll send you an automated response back. If you click that first link, you can sign up for free, and you'll have access to over 100 of our digital courses that you can take yourself, or you can have your team take. But it's all around leadership development, and it's helping the emerging generations, equipping them with the professional development skills that they need to thrive in the future workforce, the future workplace. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. So again, don't forget to text bonus to that number. Here's a recap of the 3 strategies we talked about. Now, let's take your questions, and how you do that is simply use the same polling link that you see at the bottom of the screen here, and you'll be able to now text in your questions, and then whether you text in a question or don't, you can still vote up or down the questions that you'd like me to answer. So this is helpful if we get a lot of questions for me to answer the most burning questions in the minds of all of you out there. And again, if you're watching this as a recorded, you won't be able to interact here, but hopefully we'll cover one of the questions that is in your mind. And I'd encourage you to, as you're thinking about your questions, which of these 3 might you be able to do? And I've tried to boil these down to make it super actionable and very specific. So I hope you'll consider doing one of the 3 moving forward. All right, let's see what questions might be coming in. Looks like you guys are still pondering. As you're still thinking about it, don't forget you can email me. My email's at the bottom there. Email me if you want copies of these slides, or if there's other ways I can help you, or if you want to explore working together, send me an email. And I've got some additional books out there that have all kinds of strategies. Over 20 plus strategies are in each of those books. So if you want more insight and go deeper, check out all of those resources. All right, our first question here: how do you attract Gen Z to jobs in one of the biggest industries today, working with boomers and builders? How do you attract Gen Z to jobs in one of the biggest industries today? I'm not sure I understand the question. Let me see if I can give you some other talent attraction tips. Here's a good one. A lot of organizations that we work with that are trying to attract Gen Z, specifically a lot of retail that we work with that are trying to attract Gen Zers to be in their stores and work kind of the front lines. One of the issues that they have is when they call or they email a potential candidate, they get 0 response back from Gen Z because they're not listening to their voicemails and they're not on email. So how have these organizations actually gone about interacting with this next generation? And they've actually been using a platform called Canvas, C-A-N-V-A-S, Canvas. And what Canvas is, it's the world's first text-based interviewing platform. I have no affiliation with Canvas. Just recently interviewed the CEO a few months back. And it's a really tremendous tool because you actually use it to text with potential candidates. And response rates go through the roof because Gen Z, that's the demographic, they're immediately texting back. And so this platform actually allows you to have the first interview, the first conversation, all via text. And if you'll remember, Gen Z is more interested in, or they're interested in having a job application that's less than 15 minutes, some saying less than 5 minutes. So this canvas offers that immediacy and to exchange some information to you as an employer to figure out if this is an individual you want to take next steps with. And then the individual, the candidate, can explore, hey, is this employer a good fit for me? And then from there, you can then take it into a virtual interview or a phone interview or everywhere else. But it's all about establishing that first connection and dipping your toe into that interaction to see if there's a good fit on both sides. So that's a fantastic way. So again, check out Canvas if that piques your interest. And that's a great way to get more interaction and also to position yourself as an innovative organization because you're using texting versus what many Gen Z would consider old school email. All right, next question here. How does corporate America look, traditional companies with traditional unions and policies, for example, in terms of trying to attract next generation? Yeah, good question. We work in a lot of industries that have unions and some of these traditional traditional organizations and policies and unions. And the trades can be a little bit different, but I think holistically, these the three must-haves at work, right? The better boss, bigger vision, brighter future, that's agnostic to the industry. So whether they're in a union working in manufacturing or they're in corporate America, it doesn't matter. And the research has been clear on that as well. They're still interested in meaningful work and they want to be able to contribute something. The three things that humans want in life and at work, we want to survive, belong, and become. Those are the three things. We want to survive, belong, and become. And the second thing, survive, is obvious, right? We need food, shelter, water. And once we have that, we move to belonging. We want to belong. We want to be part of a community because that's how we grew up. That's how we, as humans, evolved, right? And way back when our ancestors were roaming the plains, exclusion was deadly, to where if we weren't contributing, if we weren't adding value to a group and we got excluded from that group, our survival rate individually on our own was very low. So we did not want to be excluded from a group. Our brains still function that way. So when we're a part of a team, again, whether that's in manufacturing or in corporate America or wherever, our brain, whether we're conscious of it or not, is constantly scanning the areas, constantly scanning the team in the organization to figure out, am I contributing? Is what I have bringing value to the team? Because we want to offer value. We want to contribute, because if not, we run the risk of being excluded. And now in today's modern times, that would mean no more pay and thus then scrambling to go back to the lower rung of the three needs and to survive. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but I think that gives hopefully a little bit more context as to why these strategies that I'm sharing are really agnostic to the industry agnostic. Third question, you presented next gen employees in driver's seat. Do you expect more job hopping? No, I don't expect more job hopping. Actually, the data is, the research is pretty clear on this. While millennials job hopped a lot, and I don't think we can fault them because they had the world's opportunities in the palm of their hand, right? They had access to all of the opportunities that were over the fence like no other generation before them. So they were taking advantage, and research shows, right? When you move organizations, you tend to get a pay bump. So I don't think we can fault millennials for job hopping. But Gen Z data is showing that they're less interested in job hopping and they're more interested in role hopping inside an organization. So a lot of the organizations that we're working with, a lot of these thought leaders that we're having conversations with on our podcast are thinking about ways in which they can make work more fluid. And I think amid this pandemic, that's becoming more top of mind as well, right? How can we make work more fluid? How can we work remotely and in the office? How can we work with this organization and that department more fluidly? And Gen Z, they want to roll hop is because they want experience and they want to gain transferable skills to be able to keep them valuable moving forward. Coming up on our time. So hopefully that's helpful. So I think another good way to look at it is in the past, if we wanted career longevity, we would associate ourselves with a strong employer. But that's deteriorating. And now if you want career longevity, especially the younger generation, they're tying themselves to strong skills. And so that's why they're interested in role hopping, is because they want to build their skill set so they're valuable and they can begin contributing long term, as they're going to have a very long career, which many of us might not envy at this point. All right, just a few more minutes here. Let me see if I can, I better wrap up here because I have a closing thought for us, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Claire. So on the heels of all of our conversation, I'd like to end with this. A "this is always how we've done it" mindset is a slippery slope to irrelevance. We don't have to look too far back to see some examples of how this has played out. And of course, on the other side of this pandemic, it'll be clear too who wasn't able to adjust and pivot accordingly. So what we need to do instead, we need to prioritize why over the way. We need to be married to the mission of our organizations and our businesses, but we only date the approach, because the approach is ever evolving, and that couldn't be more true than it is today. We're having to be very agile and nimble in how we approach things, but the why should remain true. So be married to the why, but only date the approach. And so my closing thought for you is this: we should not expect, nor should we even want, this next generation to work like previous generations did. And instead, we need to be encouraging them, and we need to be equipping them to find the new frontiers of your industry, to find the new frontiers of your business, and eventually to find the new frontiers of work. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it so much. Keep in touch. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was fantastic, and that was the easiest one that I've ever had to assist with, because you had it all covered. That was great. Thank you. I actually got a chance to sit and listen, and it was great subject matter. So thank you, everybody who joined. We super appreciate your attendance again, and thank you for registering and logging in. Remember to share the word about SCORE and our webinars, and also our mentoring services, because without you guys, we wouldn't be able to continue helping you. A reminder that we are a free business mentoring entity, and we here are representing the Monmouth County, New Jersey chapter, but SCORE is a national entity, and it is supported and funded by the SBA. Today's webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, and it's also available on our Facebook page, Facebook Live, and all of our upcoming webinars are on our website at monmouth.score.org, and they're also on our Facebook page. So please check them out. We have another one coming up next Wednesday at 11. Next Friday at 11, I'm sorry. And we have next Wednesday our bi-weekly call about the SBA funding and the PPP loans and the forgiveness, etc. So register for that too if you have an opportunity. With that being said, I don't have anything else to add. Again, thank you so much, Ryan. We really appreciate your presentation today. It was really helpful, and there's a lot of good takeaways in it. So everybody enjoy the weekend. Let's hope this swamp-like weather breaks very soon, and we can get out and enjoy the sunshine. Thanks again, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.